Monark was one of the JRPGs I was most excited to get my hands on in 2022. I played the demo back when it first released and I was impressed with what I played, but I was too hooked on Elden Ring at the time to consider buying the full game. I eventually bought it back in May and I've recently finished it, and I have to say that, wow, this might be one of the most disappointing games I've ever played. Back when the demo released and people were saying that the game looked bad, I was there defending it, saying that it will have its charms and will only get better as we play. But I take everything I just said back. Now, keep in mind, I never said the game was bad per se, just very disappointing. To start with, the reason why I had such high expectations out of Monark was because it was being developed by Lankars, the company that made Lost Dimension and Zanki Zero, two games I absolutely adore. And apparently some of the people working on this game helped in the creation of the earlier Shin Megami Tensei games, so they should definitely know what they're doing, right? But apparently not. The game definitely borrows a lot of inspiration and assets from the games I just mentioned, such as the battle system being lifted straight out of Lost Dimension, the feature of commanding and customizing fiends to fight for you like in Megami Tensei, and slowly uncovering character traumas as we get through their dungeons like in Zanki Zero. I also think that the game's presentation was heavily inspired by the Caligula effect, which is also a great game in my opinion. Monarch, however, is the best example of a game that has a multitude of great ideas that were not executed properly, and it's clear to me that no proper level of care was given in some areas. Okay, let's start with what they got right, or at least tried to get right. The battle system for one was great, even though it felt like a watered down version of Lost Dimension's battle system. The fiend customization was also really fun to do. There's something addicting about farming body parts from fallen enemies and equipping them for your own fiends. One thing I think they did perfectly was the incorporation of psychology tests for the player to do that affects their stats upon completion. These were very fun to do, and they allowed the player to take a breather and do something else in between battles. The incorporation of player thoughts and decisions into gameplay is something I wish more games had. Dungeons in Monarch also had me intrigued when I first played the demo, as they aren't exactly dungeons in the usual sense. They're more like puzzles that you have to complete in order to reach the actual battlefield. I thought this idea was fantastic, as there is a major lack of puzzles in JRPGs these days. Unfortunately, the puzzles suck. They are either too easy or too obscure to figure out on your own. One of them had you look around for notes in order to piece together a password to let you pass, and I shit you not, the password was password. I swear I wanted to shut this game off right then and there. The atmosphere in these dungeons, however, were perfectly creepy, which I love very much. The hallways are very quiet and all you hear is the sound of your own footsteps, the creepy whispers of students, your own sanity meter going up, and the occasional staticky phone calls calling you into the depths of hell. What I don't like, however, is that this is basically all you're going to get out of these dungeons, since the majority of dungeons look the exact same. Okay, let's see. What else was good in this game? The music was decent, I guess. The designs of the main cast were very cool, although I felt some of them were a bit over-designed. And what else? Oh, and I really liked Vanitas. Vanitas was cool. Okay, now let's start with the actual problems I have with this game, and boy, there are a lot of them. First off, I realized that this game had a low budget, and that's completely fine. But they seriously could have done much better than the final product we got. The game honestly feels unfinished. Most of the problems stem from the characters and dialogue. For one, the developers went out of their way to make well-designed characters and a somewhat interesting story. Yet the dialogue in this game is predictable and painful to sit through. The main reason for this is that characters rarely interact with each other, as you are only allowed to bring one character with you to dungeons at a time. And later you are only allowed to go through one character's route at a time in Act 2. A person's character is only reflected when they interact with the people around them. And if all they do is interact with the silent protagonist who's only allowed to say what they want to hear, their character becomes a bland archetype. I've noticed something that this game does to bandage its lack of compelling characters, and that is that the characters themselves would straight up tell you what their personality is. Let's take Ryutaro Date for example. Throughout the arc when you partner up with him, he will frequently start his sentences with I. Like, I don't care if I get in someone's way. I don't regret a damn thing. I don't care about this. I got my own way of doing things. I am this. I want that. Basically, the game is telling us what we should know about these characters instead of showing us what they're all about. That's one. Second, I found that some cutscenes don't even make any sense. Going back to the fact that characters don't interact, there was one cutscene in particular that I found to be very odd. and minor spoiler incoming if you care enough. At the end of Act 1, when Sora is giving her villain speech to the main cast, all of them just stare at her blankly, and they don't even discuss what she's planning after she leaves. I swear it was like they were all asleep when it happened. Another one that stuck out to me was when Ryutaro got to meet Vanitas for the first time. At the time, he acts like this is the first time he's seeing Vanitas, but in actuality, he mentioned his appearance in an earlier cutscene, as if he's already met him. If proper care was given, errors like this wouldn't happen. Going back to the protagonist, there is absolutely no reason why the protagonist had to be a silent one. Don't get me wrong, most of the time I prefer games that have a silent protagonist, but in this game it serves no actual purpose. You are often presented with dialogue choices in this game, and for the most part there is no choice as you are only given one option. Basically, the main guy already has a personality. If so, then what's the point? Just let him talk. You even have a portrait ready and everything. This just makes the dialogue even more painful to sit through, especially in Act 2 where you have to choose one character to side with, and whoever you're siding with you have to sit through the rest of the game with, and all cutscenes are reduced to them being depressed and whining to us basically. And of course it's our job to comfort them, except that you aren't given a choice on what to say as you're always given just one option. To actually finish the game you have to go back and side with the rest of the characters after you're done with one of them. And by that point the cutscenes basically repeat with very few minor differences. Because of this, I started doing something I almost never do in games. I started skipping the cutscenes. The weak characters, story and dialogue are the main reasons why I'm disappointed with Monark. But the issues don't end there, unfortunately. A lot of people have already mentioned this point, but as you can see, the game doesn't run very well on a base PS4. There is absolutely no reason why a $60 game should be running this choppy in 2022. This is just more evidence as to why the game is unfinished. Oh, and by the way, $60? Really? $60 for this game? Why? Who authorized that? In no world is this game worth the $60 price tag. If you're going to get this game, only get it if it's like $20 or less. I realize I'm just ranting at this point, but this game's existence just pisses me the hell off. Okay, let me regain my composure a bit. Now, one last thing I have an issue with is the soundtrack, specifically during boss battles. I've already mentioned that I think the soundtrack is decent, and that includes the boss battle themes, which are all J-pop idol songs. However, the songs do not match the atmosphere the game is going for, in the slightest. You hear creepy whispers and devilish rock throughout the dungeons, and you end with really upbeat songs for the climaxes. This is highly inconsistent and weird in my opinion, but I know why they did it at least. Japan is big on their J-pop after all. This can work with other games such as the Caligula Effect, which has a soundtrack completely comprised of J-pop tracks, because music in that game is a central focus. But these kinds of tracks have no reason to be in Monark. The only exception to this, in my opinion, was Shinya's theme, which was called Deer. That about covers my thoughts on Monark. At the end of the day, this is just another mediocre game that eased my boredom in the week that I played it in. And it certainly isn't a terrible game. But I really hope that Lancars gets their shit together for their next game. An unrelated sequel to Lost Dimension would be a great idea in my opinion. I think that they can really flesh out their creativity with that game's concept. As for Monarch, I give the game like a 6 out of 10. The game has very fun and creative ideas, but sadly it fails in the execution.